Hi, students. This is Dr. Denikova. I am here with a guest today. We have Dr. Lily Allen with us today. She is a faculty member here in the School of Social Work, and she specializes in working with older adults. So I have her here to talk with us during our week that we're focusing on very late adulthood, as our book calls it. And, Dr. Allen, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us what you do here at LSU.
Sure. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dina for having me in the class for human behavior. And hello, students. My name is Lily Allen, as Cassie just said. And before coming to LSU, I've been at LSU for almost 20 years now. So it's kind of hard to believe because I moved from the northwest corner of Connecticut and I schooled in New York City. And then I came to the deep South. So it's been an interesting journey that's kind of planted me here. But I think you asked me where I was before and what I was doing.
Yeah, and what you do here at LSU now.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, great. So, not to jump ahead. So, I am a professor and I have a very fortunate um, endowment. I have a named professorship, which is the Sister Michael Sibyl Professor of Aging and Geriatrics, which basically means that people with very age forward thinking and advocacy with older adults funded a professorship. And if you met the criteria, which I was fortunate that I did, and submitted the the nursing home industry, if you will, supports this with other private people, and they basically invest in scholarship in LSU in the School of Social Work surrounding aging and quality of life and health and long-term care, which is what I do. So I teach. I usually do a 2-2 load, and I teach in the summer. I teach undergrad, often the skills class, which is a beginning counseling class. I teach more of the macro courses, which is things like community and agency context, which now is community engagement and grant development. And I teach policy sometimes, and I teach human diversity and oppression. I have field students. I run the promotion and tenure committee. Right now, we kind of take turns in terms of the oversight of the unit. So my hands are in a lot with the development of the program, continuing kind of with our work online and on ground or in person. I also co-run the Life Course in Aging Center on campus, which studies healthy aging from the beginning of life until the end of life. So we think of aging as a continuum. I think a lot of people think about aging like, I don't want to be old or I don't want to work with old people. So I think we all have to reposition our thinking that we're all aging, hopefully, right? And whatever we do now has implications for later. So I look at life course and aging as related.
Right. So
Mhm.
it's not just something to think about um, at the end of life, but at all points of life, you should think about aging and how it impacts you.
And
Yeah.
I would also say, even though it might be a little delicate or taboo, I would also say to be thinking about the end of life during various stages of life, since so many people we hear, haven't thought about the implications of if they die. And I've laughed with people saying I might write a book that's called If I Die. And of course, so many people say that, well, if I die, and then they give you a clause, and it's pretty absolute that we know we're going to die. So to think about death and dying with a much more kind of proactive and normalization of the reality there.
Right.
So
So when I die rather than if
yeah,
I die,
yeah,
because
yeah.
everybody will die. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Great. So now tell us a little bit about what you did before you came to LSU and how you got interested in working with older adults.
Great. Thank you. So I've been interested with working with older adults since I was very, very young. So I lived in a multi-generational family. My grandfather lived in a kind of built up, renovated garage apartment that we made very accessible for him in the 70s. So going way, way back, right? So when by the time I was 4 years old, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, lived with us. And I just always had this affinity with older adults. And then my maternal grandmother and her husband, um, actually, I lived with them in the summers on Cape Cod. We called it the Cape. And she worked in a retirement home. I was kind of at a stage where I could use a little work and kind of getting away from a large family, lots of sisters when I was a teen. So I started working in a retirement home, and it had some nursing facility opportunities there too. But I started working with older adults in their setting where they lived when I was 13 years old. So
Wow.
basically,
Yeah.
through my life, yeah. So I've worked, and I'm 52. So do the math, and that's the other thing. I'm age forward, which is not only my word, but I like to think about productive aging, aging forward. So just taking the stigma out of age. If you look around, you'll see signs that say anti-aging, or if you look at makeup, it's anti-aging. And think about what that means. It's very negative and deleterious to all of us who want to age
And it's
productively.
impossible too. It's an impossible goal not to age.
Right. So it's very it's just not productive. So I've always been interested with working with older people from church and community, family, retirement in Cape Cod. And then I when I graduated from college, I became a municipal agent for the aging, ran a general assistance program, which was the town welfare for able-bodied people at the time, which doesn't even exist now. And then I was hired to run a Meals on Wheels program. So everything kind of evolved. And you'll see, all of you know, that as you evolve in your work and you make connections, that one thing often leads to another thing. So I had a part-time job running general assistance, municipal agent, then Meals on Wheels, and then a nursing home hired me to be the social service director. And from there, I just kept, getting more degrees and working harder. And so I was nursing home director of social work, first a designee because I wasn't a social worker, and then I was a social worker once I got my MSW because my bachelor's was different. And then I became an ombudsperson. So I had a lot of nursing homes that I was responsible for advocating for the residents within. I had 34 nursing homes and 3,300 residents, and worked on my PhD. So then from there, I came here. So everything is connected.
So tell me just a little bit about the type of advocacy that you did in the nursing homes. What kind of
Great.
issues came up?
Lots of issues. So whenever there's people living together, who, by the way, older, if if people are older and in nursing homes, obviously we know that a segment are people with disabilities in nursing homes. So it's not only old or oldest old people, it's an array of ages from, my goodness, I mean, you can be a teenager actually in 18, 19 years old in a facility,
Right.
all the
I
way
think
to
the
a
push is
100.
supposed to be away from that now, though, but
They're
it's
moving away.
yeah. Right,
Louisiana still has a lot of younger people in nursing homes, though. So I'm not saying it's a good setting,
right,
but
right.
the reality is it's not only older people, but I digress and forgive me. So the areas of advocacy would be relationship challenges, maybe a roommate struggle, and it could become very almost violent. People would, have relationships and feel kind of a battle of turf. Um, People may be abused or neglected in a nursing home. So there'd be cases from very kind of questionable abuse to very clear cut abuse, where somebody might have had a spiral fracture, which they could see that there was force used and a person was actually mishandled. Um, People themselves would call the ombudsman, or their families or their representatives or their partners or lovers or friends would call. and just lodge a complaint or let the ombudsperson know that there's something that needs to be looked into. So, we would work with surveyors and tell them about concerns about discharges or keeping young people too long in a facility or mistreating people. So everything from LGBTQ issues, from to women who became very close and connected and fell in love, and the families went very, you know, mad. They got very mad, and and we act.
Trying
I
to figure
for
out
the
how
right.
to relate with mom now that they see her as a sexual being with a new partner. Yeah.
Sure, and the
And
partner was a lower income female, which was very challenging to the heterocentric family members who had a lot of power. So I've been threatened, I've been challenged. We had people who were affiliated with crime. It was a very interesting role. It was always exciting, but it challenged me to really be forward thinking and to mediate and to problem solve for the benefit of the residents. So everything you can think of: food, weight loss, decubitus ulcers, incontinent issues, restraint issues, relationship issues, sexual issues, all of these, mostly resident rights concerns, discharge issues, readmissions to hospitals, wrong medication, not enough sleep, not access to snacks. So everything under the sun that you can imagine, from small, very handable concerns to big cases that went to the Supreme Court. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So tell me, how has your practice experience impacted your research, and what would you think, at this point in your career is the most important research that you've done, and what did you learn?
Well, that's a great question. So my research, even though it varies according to, what might be happening or who's inviting me to participate, my research is always interested in the well-being of older adults. So, it's interesting because my dissertation really has fueled my knowledge forever. And even if I'm going back to 2001 when I wrote um, a study about complaints in nursing homes and what kind of issues were resolved, unresolved, what characteristics of people were being abused or neglected or exploited and what kind of facilities. So um, I've done work on abuse and neglect in nursing homes that I thought was very important. I've looked at suicide and among older adults in facilities in collaboration with other people. I really feel passionate about advancing rights to the LGBTQ community in nursing homes. So my one piece, that's a great question. I did a bunch of disaster stuff. So looking at, the St. Rita reality and how nursing homes and residents are at huge disadvantages in disasters. And we can see that with COVID. So my work is always evolving, and I hope like the best is yet to come, because now I'm looking at, it's kind of funny. I have three papers that I haven't finished in almost 2 years, which is a long time, but they're sex in the nursing home, music and meaning throughout COVID, and then cannabis use in older adults. So I'm thinking that I'm actually looking at sex, drugs, and rock
And
and
rock and
roll with
roll.
older people. So it's kind of, I have fun with it. So yeah, I don't know if there's one particular, but um, lots of stuff. Just looking at exposing care quality antipsychotic drug use in nursing homes was really important and led me to a lot of people. Um, Environmental gerontological research about how we can build places to be more responsive. So
All
and I
right.
have dogs, so they're going to start
Their
barking.
buildings, yeah. And a lot of our, interest overlap too, with me being interested in disability. And even though, the population I work with is younger, some of those same issues come up, that you're talking about. So, yeah. So I have one more question for you. So from, what you've learned in your practice and your research, what advice would you give to students who want to work in the nursing homes or want to work with older adults? What advice do you have, and what kind of skills do you think they need?
Great. And doesn't Dr. Dina Cola do a great job? She asks good questions that make me think, right? And one of the things in terms of skills and learning and tools that you just reminded me of was my ageism work. So, probably if anything speaks to how we can be better practitioners, it's studying how ageism cuts through all dimensions of all of the areas of othering or other isms. So if you're looking at intersectionality, if you're older and Black and gay, those are kind of, intersecting realities of potential oppression. So
Right.
I think my
There's
ageism work is
ableism too. A
ableism too,
lot of
for
it.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Ableism and then heterosexism and ageism. So that kind of, in this one example, the multiple effects. So I really think that my work with, I worked with a super person named Dr. Erdman Palmore, who actually constructed things after Robert Butler on ageism. So what I would tell people is to be aware of our own biases about age and to accept that we have bias about age, that we might want people to say, oh, we look good for our age. So if there's ever a disclaimer, and if age is added to the disclaimer, it really strikes of a negative view, because what does age look like? So I would encourage us to keep things in check if we ever hear ourselves speaking up or acting almost exaggerated with an older adult without knowing their ability. Very similar with your expertise in ableism. But sometimes that happens and you're not even conscious of it until you start looking at your own behavior and your own feelings about age and mortality. So
And nobody wants to do that because it's scary to people, to think about your own mortality. And people
can
will go through great lengths to avoid talking about it.
That's true. A lot of people, most of us kind of skirt around the issue or hedge around the issue because not even issue, but reality of age. So look at work that's been done on ageism, how there's basically people say positive ageism, which is interesting, or negative ageism, or anachronistic versus benevolent, which you might help somebody because of their age or look to somebody because they're wise, because they're older. So, really, just thinking of age as a part of the continuum of life with as much to offer as to learn. So, rethinking our myths about age, from sex to dementia to ability to frailty to driving, to religion. So I think we just still have a lot more to do, all of us, and to embrace age and to use anything from validation techniques to, um, if a person is confused, exploring the confusion, not trying to correct an older adult, using, just like in disability and persons with disability work, and that there's even controversy there about person first language, because some people with disabilities will be like, no, this is how I'm
No,
referred to,
in the autism community, that's a big, big thing. And
right?
really, is a pretty prolific movement now called the neurodiversity movement that is led by autistic adults, and they prefer identity first language because
Right.
they have all sorts of infographics and advocacy that they've done about how my disability is not an accessory in a purse, someone with
Right.
autism, or that they are autistic. And so um, it's something that's big in that community. I know it is for the deaf community too.
Most definitely. And along those lines, it makes you think if somebody does want to identify as, an old person, we try not to say elderly person because it's like using it, the elderly or elderly, using an adjective to describe a population is not very useful. But I prefer older adult. But if somebody says, no, I'm Lily and I'm old, if we hear ourselves saying, you're not old, it's kind of similar. We don't want to stigmatize aging, but then we don't want to diminish a person's pride of bringing back and claiming their age.
Right.
So I mean, not everyone can be Betty White, but if you think about how that's been kind of a plus throughout her latter years, and she's beloved. So really think about the way in which we look at age and we don't pathologize age as as its own problem because
It's
there's as
part
many
of
variations,
the natural life cycle is aging.
right?
And that kind of connects with the neurodiversity movement, in that, a prime tenet is that, everyone's neurology is different. So everyone's brain is wired differently. And it only becomes a disability whenever people don't accommodate each other and don't understand and accept each other. And so a difference becomes a deficit whenever society puts that label on it that it's bad. And that's what it's done with old, the word old and the idea of being old, is that there's lots of stigma there. And it's hard for us just to accept that difference for what it is and to celebrate it too. There's lots of great reasons to be old. I'm really glad I'm not a teenager anymore. Like, I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to be a teenager again. I like that I can drive. I think that I'll probably like actually being older and having more alone time. So there's lots of strengths and gifts of being older too, that people don't talk about and celebrate like we should.
True. Yeah, and even thinking about the okay boomer sort of response that some younger people almost use as a way to shut people down. So for older adults, not to shut down younger people, and likewise younger people not to shut down older people. And we're probably preaching to the choir, but I think it's relevant to think about our own relationship with age, um, using kind of advised methods. I mean, if somebody is hard of hearing, to lower your register, to speak clearly, but to ask a person, are they understanding? Can they hear me? And instead of making our own assumptions and moving forward. Um, but yeah, just really embracing age and thinking about the productive momentum and how most things that we attribute to age are areas of physical health that are able to be buffered with different interventions of health. So, like, diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiac issues, and many others that aren't just factors of age; they're factors of a bigger picture, right? Maybe neglect, maybe institutional access, maybe provision to healthcare. And so we can't get mixed up about age and health and think they're both like inextricably linked because they're
Right.
not.
And I
And
think that
that's
too
really,
about disability too. I think
yeah,
that services for people with disabilities and older adults are often lumped together, and that really bothers me that they're lumped together. Sometimes it makes sense to do that because the services are so similar, but there really is a different philosophical way to approach both of those issues, and why those people may benefit from the same types of supports. Yeah.
for sure. And we've come a long way in our care for elders and older adults because when I started, people were still putting 3 and 4 point restraints. So people have learned, thank goodness, that restricting a person's mobility will result in incontinence, confusion, falls, more medications, higher costs. So it's been, I mean, we're going back, 30 or 40 years, but the idea to be less paternalistic or maternalistic and to be more rights and self-determined driven is better for everyone in every way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Allen, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us today. I know that this is going to be really interesting for my students to connect to what they're learning in the course right now. So thank you for your time.
Well, great. Thanks. And I hope to see everybody at some point, and all the best to you during a busy time. Thank you, Dr. Dina Cola.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.